Good morning and welcome to Rising. In case you noticed, I am not in fact Crystal Ball. I am Jamal Simmons and I'm happy to be here with Saagar.
That's right. I'm happy for the Bro Show today. We've got presidential candidate John Delaney. Crystal has an amazing interview with Bernie Sanders. We've got the RNC spokeswoman Liz Harrington here to talk a little bit about what's going on with the RNC fundraising numbers. And we're going to talk about everything, including that DNC climate debate dust-up that's happening right now. All that coming up today on Rising.
Welcome back to Rising, and I think my man Saagar's got something he wants to talk about this morning.
I do. So climate activists erupted over the weekend over the continued fires that are raging in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil. It produces 20% of the world's oxygen supply. Now, the Bolsonaro-led government has come under intense criticism from the European Union, with French President Emmanuel Macron threatening to cancel a newly negotiated trade deal if immediate action is not taken. The pressure appears to have worked, and President Trump has even offered Bolsonaro any assistance needed to get the situation under control. Interestingly enough, however, it seems to have awakened many climate-concerned liberals to the idea of using economic policy to accomplish political ends. Economically retaliating against Brazil for this is actually quite a sensible policy. The problem with this, however, in particular liberal obsession, is the profound and utter hypocrisy it demonstrates in a lot of the current domestic climate rhetoric. You would think from the Green New Deal and much of the rhetoric that we hear from climate activists that the United States is the sole polluter of the world. The truth is that China far outstrips the United States in CO2 emissions, followed closely by the European Union and India. Even if U.S. climate emissions were to go to zero at this point, it would have a marginal impact on global emissions and on climate change. If you truly believe in some of the alarmist rhetoric that we see from the climate movement, then China is an existential threat to the global order. All serious environmental policy in this country, in all countries, should focus on stopping Chinese and Indian global emissions. We have to act now, right? The Chinese Made in 2025 plan and their One Belt, One Road initiative are being developed with little to no climate consciousness. China is a fundamentally rule-breaking, lawless nation that prioritizes its own development above all else. Frankly, I really don't blame him for that, but the United States must stop them. President Obama's Paris Agreement was toothless, it was unenforceable, ultimately it was a self-limiting action. It did nothing to actually address the problem, and it hands from the United States while China was allowed to break the rules and do whatever it wanted. Many of his milk-toasting, virtue-signaling policies acted in this way. Yet instead of a sensible international climate policy that actually works, Democratic candidates that we hear from are trumpeting the Green New Deal, the complete restructuring of the American economy with little to no international focus. They should focus instead on using the economic might of the United States to force China and other high-polluting nations to clean up their act. Perhaps one way that you could look at President Trump's tariffs on China are as a carbon tax. And I think, Jamal, I just don't really understand why China is so left out of the discussion on all of this climate rhetoric, because they so far outstrip every other nation. They are the world's worst polluters. They have no plans to rein in anything. And yet so many people seem to see if the United States, so many of these Democratic candidates, like we are the world's biggest polluters. We are one of the most environmentally conscious large nations that exists.
America is an environmentally conscious nation, except I will say this, America also is a leader of the world. And I think what people are looking for is to say, will the American market, the American political system, do what it takes to start leading on this issue, to keep leading on this issue, and then we can put pressure on other places. But we lose our moral authority when we pull out of these agreements like Paris, which obviously wasn't going to solve the problem, but might have got us part of the way there. Do we lose our moral authority when we go back to countries like China and ask them to do more?
I think one of the fundamental lessons that we've learned over the last 30 years is that China doesn't care about agreements. They don't care about the international order. They're going to do what they want to do regardless of what they want, or regardless of what happens, whatever happens here in the United States. So the only way to force Chinese behavior is what President Trump is doing right now. You have to smack them with massive tariffs and change their economic incentives.
Do you think that we're smacking China with tariffs in order to focus on climate change?
No, but actually reducing Chinese development is something that will significantly help with climate change. So, if we really want to get serious about this, I think the best way to do it is a carbon tariff. That's what we could call it. And 25%. There you go.
I've heard this before somewhere.